If you walked by this building in 2011, you would have found a long stretch of boarded up windows. Originally built in 1866, the Mercantile Building sits in the heart of Missoula, Montana. In 2010, Macy's, the last tenant, pulled up stakes and left the place empty. And it stayed that way for 7 years, a reminder of what happens when a place doesn't evolve. Then in 2017, plans to revamp the location finally moved forward. Demolition began. It was a controversial project. Some people objected to the cost, the disruption, and the restructuring of a historical landmark. But in the end, the builders honored the history of the place. They preserved as much as they could, and they rebuilt with an understanding of what mattered most to the people in the area: room for local shops and restaurants, a new place that wouldn't undercut the historical identity of the town. Today, the Mercantile Building is a busy hub for downtown Missoula. It's an example of how to build authentically for the future. You have to carry the past forward in a way that makes room for progress, and you have to take some risks. It's a good lesson for anyone working in corporate social responsibility. We can't move the field forward unless we do the work to understand where we've been. Welcome to Impact Studio. I am Sam Caplan, Vice President of Social Impact at Submittable. Throughout my time in the social impact sector, David Hessekiel has been a steady presence. As president of Engage for Good, he has spent the past 2 decades helping CSR professionals come together to chart the course forward. He brings an important perspective on how to balance idealism with reality, and he provides historical context on how we got here. I think it's really important to take a look back at where we came from. So to that end, I would love to hear from you, like, what was CSR like 20 years ago when you first started the Cause Marketing Forum and made your entry into the world of CSR?
22 years ago, when I think back to what was a part of almost all of these conversations, it's things that are hardly mentioned anymore. So, for example, I had gone to business school in the 80s, and it was the heyday of shareholder value. Nobody was talking about CSR. People who thought anything about values-based marketing or management were sort of sidelined into specialized programs, and it was sort of a quaint thing to have at a business school. It was still a time when people might quote Milton Friedman and say the business of business is business, and that you are taking a major detour and hurting yourself by talking about issues related to your social purpose, your environmental policies. When I started off around 22 years ago, there had been some big moves forward. There had been some major programs in which companies were trying to do well by doing good. And every presentation that we had put out there would refer back to the American Express campaign, and from which many people say the name cause-related marketing came from. And that was when American Express tied usage of the card to their support for the renovation of the Statue of Liberty in Ellis Island, and it did amazing work generating consumer interest and generating a lot of money, and it caught a lot of attention. Now, there are people who are have been in this field for some time, 5 or 10 years, who probably have never even heard of that campaign and would perhaps even say, "Oh, well, that was cause marketing, and it wasn't a real thing. Wasn't genuine enough. It wasn't authentic enough." But early programs like that, it started to prove out the idea that companies could produce major programming that had a double bottom line sort of orientation, doing something that was legitimately good for the company as well as good for the greater world.